So again, this is the Artisanal Mining Grand Challenge. And today in our webinar, we're going to address the Prevent, Remediate, Restore Sub-Challenge. And we have two panelists here with us today. I'll go through a little more of your biographies after these slides. But we have Rose Osinde Alabaster. She's the Director of Program Development at the Water, Environment, and Human Development Initiative, otherwise known as WEHDI. And we have Dr. Jack Caravanos. He is the clinical professor at NYU's College of Global Public Health, and he's also the Director of Research at Pure Earth. So again, this sub-challenge within the Artisanal Mining Grand Challenge is to address innovations, solutions, technologies that are really on-site solutions. So when we talk about the whole value chain, supply chain of things that are mined through ASM, we're looking at solutions under this sub-challenge, solutions that will be applied to or have this direct impact at the site where items are mined. So the Prevent, Remediate, Restore sub-challenge seeks breakthrough innovations that are implemented at ASM sites to prevent, remediate, or restore impacts from ASM to water, hydrology, land, biodiversity, human health, and/or ecosystems. A little more explanation about this sub-challenge. This is all information that's on the website and also in the Innovator's Handbook. But I'm not going to read it off right now, but this second paragraph down here just gives a little more context for the sub-challenge. So actually, I will read through it. The environmental and health impacts of ASM activities differ by commodity and location. ASM operations tend to use the most accessible, the most inexpensive, readily available, traditional methods to mine materials. These methods are not always environmentally responsible, healthy, safe, cost-effective, or efficient. So this sub-challenge really seeks solutions that will prevent those anthropogenic sources of toxic contaminants, such as mercury, used in gold mining, and other heavy metals from entering the environment. It seeks solutions that will remediate or restore the land, reduce changes to hydrological functions and water quality, reduce habitat loss for terrestrial and aquatic species in core biodiversity regions, such as dry and wet tropical forest in the Amazon, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia. However, these innovations and solutions are not limited to these geographic locations. And in addition, solutions that can reduce negative health impacts and other social costs. So with that, I want to go into some introductions of our two panelists. First of all, we have Dr. Jack Caravanos. He has experience working in the jungles of Madre de Dios in the Peruvian Amazon, studying toxic substances, as well as experience in Zambia, Indonesia, and Bolivia, studying lead and other toxic waste. He partners with Pure Earth, like I mentioned, which is an international nonprofit organization. And with that organization, he's studying the impact of gold extraction with mercury in Peru and Indonesia.
Thank
you. It's great to have you here. We also have Rose Osinde Alabaster. She is the Director of Program Development at the Water, Environment, and Human Development Initiative, WEHDI, and she has 20 years of experience in the development practice as a governance and institutional development expert, particularly in the fields of water, sanitation, environment, and education. She is trained in water and land governance with specialization in conflict resolution and management, as well as international development and human rights. Yeah, so I think we'll start off with, I'll give both of you a chance to make some opening remarks. A little bit more, this could be an opportunity to talk a little bit more about your backgrounds and I think we can also, so your backgrounds and also maybe a statement about how you hope to, what is it, what are the kinds of solutions or ideas, innovations that you hope to see come through the Artisanal Mining Grand Challenge? And Rose, why don't we?
Okay, thank you, Barbara. From my background in and interest in water governance and cross-sector linkages, because water cuts across many sectors, I would want to see, as we move forward with this discussion and contribution through the innovations, some linkages across the sectors, first and foremost, before we even look at the challenges that face the small-scale miners and the artisanal mining. Part of these challenges arise because we are focusing on trade, economic well-being of our situations in the country and local level, but also improving livelihoods and looking at poverty issues. So in terms of solutions, it will call for cross-sector linkages because the impact of mining, whether it's large-scale mining or small-scale mining, the impact goes beyond trade and economic aspects of development. So that's one of the key things that for me is important, that there is a multi-dimensional approach to the innovations that emerge. One of the things that we're looking at as a challenge is the fact that there's use of low technology by the artisanal small-scale mining. It's labor-intensive in most cases. It's dangerous in the way the extraction and processing is done, especially in the sub-Saharan Africa. So with this, we expect that these innovations comes with technology that is much more efficient, that is safer in terms of occupational safety, that also leads to safety in terms of minimizing public health, environmental damage to water, to the and other natural resources. So for this to happen, new technology comes with new challenges. And I'm just talking about technology because some of the innovations will require technology. So where new technology is expected to emerge to resolve the issues, we expect certain considerations to be given. One, is the technology going to be locally sourced? And if not, will this lead to preferential procurement related issues? Some forms of technology, especially already being proposed in the mining sector, may be digitalized kind of technology, and this will impact on livelihoods in terms of jobs. But that's the bigger scheme of things. When we move lower down to the actual mining by the operators, I would like to look at aspects of policy and regulation incorporated into the innovation, because there is opportunity to innovate and come up with solutions that reduce, for instance, the use of mercury in gold mining, but are there standards in given context? Are these standards being followed? Is there sufficient regulation? Are the laws and policies understood by the small-scale mining and the artisanal miners? Because sometimes there's lack of awareness, and moving the existing policies, regulatory framework to actual application may be limited, not just because the regulation, but the regulatory systems are not affecting that, but it could also be that there may be some need to educate and raise awareness and advocacy about what are the governing standards, guidelines, what are the existing laws and regulations that are in force, and how do we intend to organize the small-scale miners and artisanal miners to integrate this into their practice. The second thing is dealing with the kind of licensing. We're talking of organizing. Some of the small-scale miners and artisanal mining in some countries are not licensed. But even when they're licensed, there are certain bureaucracies that inhibit proper practice to be able to competitively contribute to the value chain nationally. How do we deal and contribute as we come up with these ideas, contribute to reduction in the system of bureaucracies or licensing that pushes, it brings the formality into the activities of the operators, but at the same time, deliberately could pose limited access to mineral deposits or mineral-rich areas, limited access to capital, limited access to markets, because these are the issues that will make people comply with an organized system of operating or not. So we have to integrate softer issues of policy, governance, advocacy, awareness. And then if we innovate and come up with some form of influencing in terms of improving practice, the data or information that is generated or the outcomes that cause improvement on the ground, how is this data going to be available publicly from the way we organize the action on the ground? At the end, are we, because what often happens is with private sector engagement, if we have an innovation that engages private sector, sometimes there are issues around the data, sharing the information after. So just having these softer issues taken into account. Then the other thing that I would also like us to think about is the link between mining and climate change, because this is a debate, discussion that is current in terms of development practice. How do we make mining climate smart? And how do we also make community smart mines in the process as we engage? So there is an opportunity in the climate change field, while we look at how mining is done, how to improve the systems that enable the operators to be more effective, more efficient, more connected to the to the value chain, to the chain, to the market chain or value chain. How do we take into account this other new opportunities for a new wave of innovation? Because within this debate of climate smart mining and community smart mines, this is where we're going to have a reduction in carbon and some specific policy measures will be required, which of course will be country specific. So at the general level, I think there's those opportunities there that we need to integrate, not just looking at technology or methodology, but to look at opportunities that are there to influence more systemic permanent changes, but also to have innovations that can then be scalable because we have influence at specific levels, or come up with innovation that is responding to development challenges and development opportunities.
Yeah, thank you, Rose. You've given you've made a lot of really important points and given potential applicants in this challenge a lot to think about, and a lot of points that they should consider and elaborate on in their applications. Thank you. Jack, would you like to elaborate on how I introduced you, and if you want to add more about your background and your experience, and then perhaps build off of what Rose has provided in her introduction. And I'm giving you a lot to do here, and also what you hope to see come out of the Artisanal Mining Grand Challenge.
Yes, thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me to be part of this effort. It's a wonderful effort. Rose said a lot, and I don't want to repeat any of that. So let me just give you a quick bio of what I've done over the years. Many years ago, I was more involved in the U.S. environmental occupational health world. But in the past 15 years, I've been working with Pure Earth on this. And I've been to many mining sites. Unfortunately or fortunately, most of them tend to be poisonous. Lead mining, asbestos mining. I've been to, of course, many mercury mining and gold mining sites, and of course, copper mining. So that's, I've not done any work in the gems and mineral sort of area, but the problems are uniform, very often systematic, so that some of these interventions can apply to many different realms. I think my message to you is to try to think out of the box. And you can see here behind me this colored chart I have. I was brainstorming, and we try to use what they call a systems thinking approach. So if you put the word ASM, artisanal small scale mining, in a circle, and then start pulling off deforestation, climate change, poverty, human rights, water impacts. And then for each of those subcircles, there's many different other parts that are related to it. For example, one frustration I've noticed is we try to minimize exposure to mercury in the gold mining world. And we try very hard to do that, but we don't want to put these people out of work because they're very often subsistence miners. They are artisanal miners. They need income. They need rice. They need food. So the question is how to balance that. And it's very easy to say, okay, stop that, ban mercury, stop the sale of exotic stones or something. But it's very often a little bit more complicated. So in thinking, try to extend your thoughts to other disciplines. And there's a role here for urban planners, for lawyers, for human rights specialists, for water engineers, for air quality people, for geochemists. And I think what we want here, or at least what this effort's all about, is sort of innovative, clever ways that sort of don't just address one little part of a solution, one little part of a problem that then causes another area to sort of bubble to the top. So we want sort of sustainable interventions that sort of fix this. Anyway, I think we need to hear from the audience and take some questions. So Barbara, I'll give it back to you. And Rose and I guess, are ready to answer whatever questions are put forth.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to start off with, since this sub-challenge is focusing on prevent, remediate, and restore, maybe we could take each of those sections separately and think about what are some successes and what are some, I don't want to call them failures, but things, innovations, programs that have not been successful for some particular reason. So when we think about preventing environmental contamination, preventing social and human health issues related to artisanal and small-scale mining, what are some interventions, tools, technologies? What are some things that have worked? And then what are some areas, what are some, I mean, I guess I'm not asking for particular solutions, but when you think about preventing what is it that you want to prevent? And what are those constraints that we can try to prevent through some innovations in this competition?
Well, okay, let me dive in. When I think prevention, public health prevention, primary prevention is sort of preventing the problem from even occurring. And I remember I did some math once of just calculating how much copper and gold and zinc and aluminum are found in electronics. So you could take a room the size of my office here, fill it up with broken pieces of computers and circuit boards. And when you think of mining the mass in this room, you would get so much more, orders of magnitude more gold, copper, zinc, tantalum, all these exotic rare earth metals. And we're also sort of saving the ecological impact from doing the mining. Now, of course, that shifts the work from artisanal to a more formalized industry. So it would be, it would be so much better for everybody involved if we could get these workers out of the artisanal world into a more formal. So if companies in countries invested in processing electronic waste, we're doing two things. We're giving these people good, safe jobs, as well as no ecological devastation, as well as moving towards a more sustainable economy. So there are many examples that way. And of course, there's prevention of contamination, which is good engineering controls. And then prevention of health damage would be protective equipment for the workers that are doing this kind of work, whether it's safety or health issues. So it is, there's plenty of room there for improvement.
Thank you. Rose, do you have comments? Hold on, you're still on mute. Okay.
Yeah. My focus as WEHDI, we are focusing more on the policy drivers and the standards and occupational safety and public health safety. So for me, I'm seeing a departure from preventing the negative socioeconomic environmental impacts, which I think has already been summarized very well. But if we proceed from, if you look at the prevention, it's preventing, as my colleague said, preventing what we do not want to happen. And part of those are those negative impacts on the environment, especially the pollution of water, natural resources like water and the soil. But at the same time, we need to take back the responsibility of prevention to the right place. And this goes back to who is responsible for ensuring a clean and safe environment, and who is responsible to ensure that as we develop and ensure that communities can have their livelihoods and improve that, that this prevents these negative aspects from happening or occurring. So that takes me to the right to clean and safe environment, which is the responsibility of government. And in that responsibility, then the government has the responsibility to respect, protect, and fulfill this kind of responsibility to its citizen or population. So that's the first thing I think we need to remember, that even as we target the small scale miners and the artisanal miners and the big in relation to what is happening in an organized system of trade and contracts with the larger companies, we need to remember who needs to ensure the regulation is functioning, that it's not weak, that we strengthen those institutions that ensure prevention actually does happen. So we need to take it back to that point. And then that opens then the doors to what are the steps that need to be taken. How do we ensure due diligence, even as we organize the small scale miners? Because as we said, we don't want to push them out because they are relying on this as a means of their livelihood and reducing poverty among communities. And it's the resource that is available to them within their local context. So that prevention or preventative measures have to integrate a development of ownership models. And I like the fact that like the government of Tanzania, and maybe the people in the mining sector may not be seeing what I see, but the fact that the president of Tanzania has actually been very vocal and taken steps to make sure that mining actually benefits the local communities. It is a big step as the authority with the responsibility to ensure that prevention actually of negative impacts does happen, and that includes really taking care of the population's needs, the local population's needs. And then following that, then now we start looking at these different scales. How do we support systems and actions that then ensure there is prevention? So the standards and guidelines and organizing these communities and the operators in a way that they still feel they can access the resources, but access the resources responsibly while protecting environment and other downstream natural resources that could suffer at the expense of people making their livelihoods better upstream or midstream.
Thank you. Jack, you have a lot of experience here in I think, remediation of polluted and contaminated sites and restoration. Do you want to comment a bit on those approaches for improving the ASM sector, and specifically maybe some examples of remediation or restoration projects that have really worked well, and if you can pinpoint why those have worked?
Yes, let me focus on the artisanal gold mining world, where mercury is used in small quantities to extract gold particles from alluvial soils or hard rock mining. So what happens here is you're crushing a rock, releasing flakes of gold the size of flour, very, very small, and then using the mercury to capture it. The mercury concentrates the gold, and then you squeeze out excess mercury, and you're left with the silver nugget. And then heat is applied to this to drive off the mercury. Essentially, the mercury evaporates from the nugget, and you're left with a nice piece of relatively pure gold, almost to the point where you're getting fair market value for that gold. So the positive sort of aspect of this for the miners is they're not making pennies on a dollar. They're actually making a decent return for the gold they get. So the question is how to intervene there. So, do we stop them using mercury? Well, we tried, and then in Indonesia, people discovered there's a mercury ore, a mountain of mercury ore that you could literally take rock called cinnabar, heat it up, release the mercury, and make your own mercury. So this is how clever people are when they really rely on the economy. They will actually go to extraordinary lengths to sort of fix a little obstacle. So we realize that we sometimes cannot get them to stop using mercury, so that the key there would be to use mercury safer, and to do it outside, and to keep it away from children, and to not use your hands. So some of the workplace practices seem to be working. Obviously, education helps a lot, and repeated education, followed by pre and post-test success stories, meaning did the levels of mercury in the urine really go down after we educated the people, after we told them how to use the mercury, or how to particularly keep the area clean. So that's also important. And that may be an interesting part here in everybody's concern about their proposals, is how, and Barbara, you may want to talk about this, how will you validate whether your intervention is succeeding? So just keep that in the back of your mind. So there are many sorts of interventions. I am really worried about the ecological devastation, and there's some clever things that people are doing. Instead of ripping off the topsoil and getting to the alluvial gold-containing layers, people are storing the topsoil, so then afterwards you could put it back in pockets and it could reseed the area. So very often people would just bulldoze the topsoil, it would get washed into the rivers and disappear, as opposed to encouraging people to capture this, hang on to it, and actually restore the land. So it's what's happening in the Amazon and other parts of, in Ghana and Kumasi. It's devastating. It hurts you so much to see the ecological devastation there. So there are interventions. I do like Rose's point that legislative interventions, political interventions are also sometimes a bit more sustainable, because you have a couple of people that do something and it works very quickly, but you don't get good traction on it because it takes a little longer to process the gold and they're not making as much money. So ultimately, it's a combination of different parts of the country's efforts to really fix this. The engineers, the academicians, the politicians, the urban planners, and of course, the people. So those are a couple of examples. But I see there may be some questions coming up, so I'll give it back to you, Barbara.
Okay, thank you. Rose, did you want to add to anything there?
Just on a not yet quite tested approach, but one thing I would like the applicants to consider also in terms of restoration of the soil, and I'm happy that Jack mentioned the capture examples of capture of the topsoil and then restoring back to the land. In Ghana, there are some examples of recycling bio-waste. And this bio-waste, we are now thinking as WEHDI on a project that we are intending to use the recycled waste, which is both from the fecal sludge mixed with bio-waste with fecal sludge, then digested to produce gas, electricity, and manure. And we need to start thinking about how we can clean the environment from some of the bio-waste to be restored back to the soil, in addition to this kind of examples of capturing the topsoil and then putting it back, where there are no heavy metals, where we can actually restore the soil back. We need to think about how we can return some of this bio-waste back to the environment in a safe way, thus sustaining clean environment further beyond the mining areas, cleaning from the other parts of the community, but bringing this to actually contribute to soil restoration. At the river, at the level of water quality, damage to water quality, there's several tools I think that could be integrated in monitoring water quality, so that we also can come up with innovations that address other challenges arising from this small-scale artisanal mining, which is for a long time, especially like in Ghana and Africa, that has posed a lot of challenges on drinking water. And to place this within the context of global policy drivers like the SDGs, how are we going to, how can these innovations contribute to the SDGs through these processes of prevention or restoration or remediation? How can they contribute to better access to more accelerated efforts to clean water. If there's pollution happening, how can we monitor levels of pollution? How can we then contribute to processes of delivery of services? So in other words, how can we look at beyond this sector, other sector contributions to contribute to either prevention or remediation or restoration that could be captured at some level so it doesn't get too costly, then to deal with meeting basic services for these communities.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I really encourage applicants to look outside of the sector. Definitely, what are some similar types of problems that exist elsewhere, and what types of solutions approaches have worked in those cases? We have a question here. I'm just going to read it off for you too. We often hear educating people to strive to combat the devastating environmental consequences of ASM, but where do you think that education should occur? Schools are not always offering environmental subjects in their curriculum, and people in remote areas do not always have access to training. So this is a great question, and in context of this competition, where do you see the role of education? Rose, Jack, who would like to take the question first?
Okay.
Rose, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thanks. That was actually one of the points I was going to front, because when we look at the skills that are needed within the mining sector, those skills are coming from technical institutes. If we look at it formally, if we were to formalize and engage better and advance the knowledge, the technicians coming from technical institutes training to do work related to using their hands to explore, to clean and package, and it will be the technical, first of all, the technical instincts. We need to not just teach the technical skills. So we have to partner with technical institutions to give this understanding of the guidelines and policies that govern the technical work, and also the ramifications of not respecting these standards, not just standards to create a product that fits a certain measurement, but the standards that govern practice. So if we can take this a step back to how we train and what level of training we can undertake, then at the formal level, it will be the institutions of learning this technical subject. But at the same time, there can be learning and education through associations. Like I know in Tanzania, they have Association of Small-Scale Miners established. And I think the World Bank, through some project, working with these associations. These associations can have capacity enhancement that can focus, that can target this knowledge to educate them on a number of issues on their occupational health and safety, the impact on their health, safety, giving them even the data on safety records that exist in a given context and how we can reduce occurrences of that. So we have to target and organize systems through which we can educate. At the same time, educating the communities as well to understand the damage that this is causing and the potential negative health impacts and poor health that can arise as a result of engaging directly with soil that has heavy metals, or using water, because sometimes communities will say, okay, I'll use this water for washing or cleaning, and then I can get drinking water and cooking water from somewhere else. Just for communities to be educated as well through, there are usually mechanisms at community level that exist for other purposes, and those can be utilized. But education has to be very well targeted at different levels, I think.
Yeah, Jack, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you. I think what I want to add is there's many levels of education. We find that ministers, assistant ministers in many of these countries are not science people. They're appointed for other reasons, and while their hearts may be in the right place, they just don't have the science tools and knowledge to make the right decisions. So how do you get to them? You could try to set some programs where you train them. It could be a web-based training. It could be through their local university, University of Zambia, Lukasa in Zambia. We have some partners there, and they get involved in some of the training we do in Kabwe. So because they're more respected if they come from their local countries, but we need to train the professors to do the other training. So that's one angle. I'm very big. It's amazing. And I think Rose will tell you also, you go into the jungles of Kumasi and someone has an Android smartphone, usually recharged using a solar panel of sorts, but the potential there is just enormous. So those may be some interesting, innovative projects. The last thing I want to say is if I had to train one group of people, I would probably focus it on early education teachers because they have a big impact. They're teaching the children. Parents are good, but of course that's another duty they have. But I think if we could give the school teachers at the early ages, then they share that info, and then the kids will, of course, grow with that paradigm and that concept, and hopefully live with it. But very often they don't have the knowledge, and they need some of the tools, whether it's the exercises or the videos or the lesson plans. I always think it's environmental science is a wonderful mechanism to teach chemistry. And same thing with biology, same thing with geography. What a great way to study geography by studying polluted places and mining and maps. And I think sometimes they need those sort of tools.
Barbara, can I come in just 1 minute just on that point?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry because I just remembered something as Jack was giving his perspective. At the higher level, at the higher political level, you know, we have parliamentary committees on planning for the different sectors. So the parliamentary committee on water or environment or finance or whatever. These are decision makers, I think, that can also be targeted to be, because we're talking about enhancing policies to support small-scale miners and artisanal miners, but also improving regulation and that. So for them to put some resources for these processes to happen, they need to have this understanding. And we need to use the existing, what we have available from science, from the research on mercury and the impact of other minerals. We need to package this in a language that these parliamentary committees can understand, and then they can take these decisions to another level.
Yeah, that's it. These are all excellent points. So something that you mentioned, Jack, you mentioned smartphones and how just it's this technology that is in the hands of many people around the world. I'm wondering what kind of information would you want to push to people, to those smartphone owners who are also engaged in ASM? What is that? Can you think of the information that you want them to access and through a smartphone, where the smartphone might make sense as that medium for information?
Yes, well, there's many ways to approach that. I think, I'm a professor at NYU. They're very motivated, bright kids here, graduate students, and it's amazed how often they don't realize the hundreds of apps out there, hundreds of databases, that if you wanted to know what restaurant in New York City has the most food sanitation violations, you can get it almost instantly. But they didn't know that. And whether it's water quality, air quality, whether it's where does our garbage go, or populations at risk, there are so many databases that people just are overwhelmed because smartphones are just there's just so much out there. And sometimes you need someone to sort of just focus their attention. So I would say databases are always fun to search, and what lessons can be learned from there. And number two is very short, concise lessons, whether it's mercury migration in soil, whether it's measuring infant mortality, the generations today, just a few minute videos, very short, compact, strung together into a lesson that is a common, addresses a common theme. And it could be, ASM awareness and ecological devastation. What is ASGM? What's the devastation? What are some of the ways that people are addressing it? So that could be a little lesson that teaches people. So, but I do think it's not only underutilized, it's going to be a major way we communicate and educate people globally. Because as I say, wherever I go, there's an Android phone. Not usually an iPhone, but usually it's an Android phone everywhere.
Yeah, that's a great insight. Rose, did you want to comment on that? I'm wondering if you have opinions about
Yes.
what kind of information would you want to push to ASM communities, and it might not even be pushing that information, but there's a smartphone is more interactive too.
Yes, indeed. I'm looking at because of the kind of approach that the small scale miners have been engaging in now up to date. They've been mining into, for instance, conservation areas, prohibited areas, for instance, and ruining the biodiversity and ecosystem. So I think reminder messages on those kind of no-go zones, compliance messages, for instance, if there's a process to report or pay for your license, or just to enhance reminders of what are the standards, guidelines, and stuff like that can also be so somebody doesn't have to say, I was not aware that this exists, or just to remind them of the fines, or if there are fines for going into prohibited areas, but also if there are cases of going into hotspot areas as well, possibilities of opportunities to come up with SMEs if they are organized as a group. There could be some messaging also that communicates what those groups are doing. So in essence, we just want to have continuous education. So we could have a number of messages that are organized that go through to either update on what's going on, new prices, or reduction in, there are those vulnerabilities of price fluctuation. So maybe people can be forewarned about what the price looks like, or stuff like that. Or if there are health and safety issues with respect to damaged environment, then those messages also can be shared, and that can go beyond the operators to the communities.
Yeah, that's great. I have another question about field work in particular. So Jack, maybe this is getting at some of your experience. when you're in the field and you're working on these research projects, which are, you know, it's applied research for you too, right? You're assessing contamination, but you're also putting in practices to remediate and to clean, restore the damage that has been done. And that takes you, a scientist and a team, to initiate and to carry out these practices. Can you think of some ways in which these types of remediation and restoration practices might be put in the hands of the people who are experiencing this on a regular basis? I mean, something that they could initiate and do themselves.
Yes, and I have to say it's always tempting when you go into these situations and these exposures in these countries to sort of say, well, I know what's best, and this is what we did here, so we should do this here. And of course, that's probably doomed to fail. So you really do need, if you're going to put into a proposal for this award, to really think about engaging the local partners and listening to them and allowing them to not just have a say, but also to share with them their ideas. Because very often they know a better way to do it. They know a safer way. And for whatever reason, it's just never occurred. And I also like to get different people involved. You may say, well, what does an urban planner have to do with environmental restoration? Or what does a real estate, what does a local business person have to do with this particular issue? But you'd be surprised how by bringing these different disciplines in, against thinking of the whole thing as one big problem with many tentacles, that the solution is multidisciplinary if you want it to be sustained, versus just, you know, removing a hazard and then next thing you know, 2 years later, there's more contamination right where you did that first remediation. So using some of these local, not just local partners, but also disciplines, and getting as many perspectives. And sometimes that's very hard for an engineer to listen to a different person of a different discipline to come up with some other ideas. Well, and that's going to take some patience to let that happen. But that's absolutely essential. So getting those local partners, not just, you know, the people affected, but also the disciplines.
Yeah, that's key. Rose, do you want to add?
Yeah, I like Jack's idea of involving actors beyond who normally is involved. And it's important to really have the engagement of the community where the action will take place in terms of the project action. Why? Because there are different people that govern natural resources or utilize them in a particular way. And I'm thinking about gender issues here. Will we have, because of monitoring of changes that we will effect through these innovations, we need to start thinking of a very comprehensive monitoring framework that we can get feedback, not just from either the science or the outputs from the technology or activities, but also getting some public information. Can we get feedback, for instance, that the community can report on?
There's only a couple more minutes left, so and I don't see any other questions that have come in, so we can wrap up, and it would have been nice to get Rose's final input as well, but I'll ask you this final question, Jack, and it's a bit related to the first hundreds of questions that I asked in the beginning. But if there was this, you know, if you had this magic wand, if you know, there's no barriers, no constraints like monetary constraints. What is the innovation that you want to see developed through it, let's say through this challenge? What is that innovation that you would really like to see that would improve,
Oh, geez,
vastly
yes.
improve the ASM sector?
That's it's the holiday season, so I might as well ask for the
Go
biggest.
big.
Oh, gee, I would really like to see I'd like to see chemical engineering advance to the point where we can easily extract the minerals from all our electronics. These electronics, my desk is full of them, they're not going to go away, are full of valuable minerals that took a lot of energy digging out of the ground and concentrating. I think that is my big hope, and countries are moving there. It's expensive. China's a bit of a leader. Here's an interesting little fact. Every medal in the Olympics in this January in Japan, or February, has come from mobile phones. You're going to hear about this in the next few months, but every gram of gold and silver and tin and copper for the metals is actually completely recycled, and they did it in record time. They didn't think they would do it. And that offers a tremendous inspiration. If they can do it, well, why can't the rest of the planet do it? But what also has to happen is Dell, Apple, IBM needs to design equipment that metals can be easily extracted out of. So it's, they design something, and even opening up your iPhone is almost impossible. So we need to do better engineering so that recyclables are possible. So that would be my biggest sort of engineering sort of hope. And I think it will happen in due time. The economics are there. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you're looking at solutions that it's not necessarily on the ground for ASM, but these are, look at all of the electronics and all the uses of our current devices, and how can we more efficiently and cost effectively recover those minerals for reuse. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Jack. And we'll thank Rose as well, even though she unfortunately dropped off the call. This concludes our webinar. We will it's recorded, so we'll archive this. And if people have additional questions about the Artisanal Mining Grand Challenge, general questions, as well as technical questions, they can send those to water@conservationxlabs.org. Thank you again. And we will conclude there.
Okay, thank you. And I'm always here for you. So let me know how I could help.
All right, great. Thank you, Jack.
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.